Okay, let me throw this link here one more time. This is the link to Minty. And if for some reason you invited someone and they did not get the new version of the meeting link, this is the meeting we're in right here. I inadvertently sent out a corrupted link, and I'm not sure. So anyway, if somebody texts you and say, "Hey, I can't get in the meeting," that will get them there. Okay, we're going to be starting about talking about leading edge. Okay, thumbs up. Can everybody see and hear okay? Is that working for everybody? Thumbs up if you can see and hear okay. Okay, I see some thumbs up, so that's great. Let's see if I can get into full screen mode here. Let's go. Play. I guess that may be the best we can do. Okay. Oh, it fixed itself. Okay, last week we talked about leading Agile, and let's see. Oh, and yeah, I tried something here. I've been experimenting with some different things. So here's me as, I guess, Groucho Marx or something. Anyway, we're talking about leading Agile. And last week we talked about some aspects of leading Agile, and we're going to kind of continue that now. And one thing I want to point out is this isn't just about if you are a manager. So even if you're not a manager or in an official leadership position, these concepts we're talking about should be very relevant for anyone that's participating in an Agile team, because leadership happens, there's formal leadership, but leadership happens every direction, up, down, sideways. And so the takeaways from this should be relevant to you regardless of what your official role is on the team, because we're all influencing others in one way or another. So if we go back and we say, well, what does it mean to lead an Agile team? We're going to have to look at the manifesto, which is broken down into Agile values, and these are the values. We've got other talks where we go into these in detail, and then the 12 Agile principles. But the question I want to ask for you is, if this is how we're defining a team as being Agile, and that's kind of the standard we're using to measure against, how long has it been since you discussed these different things? And I put just a few things around here. The bottom two are kind of not directly related to Agile values and principles, but they kind of come out of it. So are these things that you should have sliders? Are these things that you haven't really discussed for 3 months, or are they things that you probably discussed in the last 3 days? So pull those sliders back and forth. And this is not meant to be a super accurate assessment of exactly how long things have taken. The idea here is to just kind of get a feel for how much are these things driving the way that your team makes decisions. Because when we're talking about leadership, we're wanting to lead the teams by pointing them toward the Agile values and principles in order to help them make progress. And if you're on a team where the Agile values and principles are kind of just assumed that we're doing it, and we're not actually bringing back our decisions to look at, we're not taking our decisions and measuring them up to the Agile values and measuring them up to the Agile principles, it's very easy to get caught into a rut where we're doing everything just because that's how we've always done it. The most healthy teams I've worked with are ones where they keep going back and asking themselves, they're faced with a decision, and they'll say, okay, we could do X, Y, or Z. And then the discussions that come out of that are driven by the Agile, particularly the Agile principles, and saying, okay, if we actually believe that it's more effective to communicate face to face, and we're about to make this decision that would push us away from that, how is that going to impact our ability to be effective? And which doesn't mean they never decide we're going to do a phone call or something like that, but that's always in the back of their mind as they try to make decisions. And that's always help. It's always the magnifying glass that's being used to look at our decisions and say, okay, how are these going to impact our ability to deliver with agility? And the beauty of that is you end up, when a team's working that way, you end up with a very shared approach to how decisions are being made. So in the best case, teams get to the point to where it's a lot easier and faster to make decisions because everyone is generally using the same standard. And instead of just arguing about what you should do, people are bringing together different aspects that need to be included as part of the conversation, but you end up with a lot more buy-in and a lot more consensus because everybody's using the same standard to measure to decide if something is is a good decision or a bad decision. Now, that isn't to say that there's no conflict, but it's a very different type of conflict because it's built around, it's a conflict that's very healthy and not conflict that you feel bad participating in. And having the agile values and principles is one of the things that helps make teams healthy like that. Because if everybody's got a different idea of how you say something was a good decision or a bad decision, it's very difficult to have. If you don't have shared values, don't have shared principles, it's very hard to make decisions. And when you do make decisions, invariably you have some people that just completely disagree with them, and it creates a very unhealthy team. Okay, so it looks like most of us are kind of on the closer to the 3 months on the agile values and principles. And I'm not saying this isn't necessarily good, isn't necessarily bad, but this is something we ought to be thinking about of how are we influencing our teams. Are we, maybe it's a matter of whenever a decision comes up, we can say, okay, what's the principle that, are there any principles that would impact this that might help us make the best decision possible? It might be as simple as doing that. It looks like a lot more of us are on the cycle time, or have been talking about cycle time and limiting work in progress. I'm actually surprised to see that the cycle time is quite that high. I expected that to be lower and limiting work in progress to be lower. Although maybe this is a self-selected group that the people that are interested in leading agile teams are talking about these things. Okay, so leaders are going to recognize organizational barriers. It would be nice if there were no organizational barriers to anything we do, but the reality is there are going to be organizational barriers. And one of the things that good leaders of agile teams, and keep in mind, I'm not just talking about people that have the official leadership position. I'm also talking about people on the team that are influencing the team in any way. But people that are bringing influence to the team and leading a team, up, down, sideways, however, are going to recognize organizational barriers that might make it harder to follow the agile principles. And one of the things I like to ask teams to do, and this is an exercise that's very easy to do with teams, it's a lot of fun, or I found it very fun and insightful. I like to give teams, everyone, a stack of business cards that have each of the 12 agile principles listed on. So everybody gets all 12 agile principles, and you can write them down. You can do it with a tool like Mentimeter has a way to do this as well. But I ask them to take these 12 principles, 12 cards, and sort them, force rank them. So at the very top, put the things that are really easy to do, or maybe even not just easy, but the things that they feel the team is doing a really, really good job of at the top. And make sure that at least the top 3 are the things that they feel the best at how the team is doing. And then put the 12 principles at the bottom, and then sort them so at the bottom are the principles that they feel are the most difficult for the team to do and have the most organizational friction. That are really difficult because of whatever it is about either the team or the organization. Those are really hard to do. And so I give people a few minutes to sort these. So we've got all 12 things sorted, and at least, depending on how much time we are, it's not important that everyone is precisely forced ranked. But if you have the 3 that you think are the easiest at the top and 3 that you think are easiest at the bottom, and then we go around and just kind of talk through what did you put at the top and why did you put it there. And what's very interesting about this is you'll have one person say, oh, I think as far as like working with the customer, we're doing a great job of doing that, and we've got it at the top. And you'll have somebody else say, yes, I think it's at the top as well. And then you'll have somebody else speak up and say, oh, that was the bottom one for me, because here's the aspects of things that I see that we could do better and are really, really hard to do as far as working with our customers every day. And those conversations are very productive because we're taking the agile principles, which we're all saying we're taking the agile principles, which we're trying to follow in order to achieve agility for the team. And we're having discussions about not only the things that we're not doing well, but the ways that we are doing really well. So it's not a negative discussion, but it helps us see aspects of things where I may feel that we're just doing a great job of the way that we're communicating with our customers. We're communicating with every day. Somebody else may be looking at a different aspect than what I'm seeing and see lots of areas that we can improve. Well, if I only keep my point of view, I might overlook a lot of opportunities for improvement. But if I've got that conversation going, it's a lot easier for me to see, oh, here's this aspect I haven't thought of before, and maybe I can help influence toward being better in that area. So I highly recommend that exercise. Like I said, I print up the Agile principles on business cards, and have, decks of 12. You can just write them down. You can put them on sticky notes. You can do it lots of different ways, but that's a very productive conversation to have with people and can be very insightful, and it's a very good way to move the team forward, to help influence the team toward thinking more about how the agile principles are being used in their day-to-day basis. Yes, force ranking the principles. I did put that on that slide. Okay. So when you're trying to lead or influence an agile team, one of the things that's very, very important to do is to lead by defining value. So, question for you here, how does your team define value? So if you had to explain to someone what your team defines as being valuable, and as simple as you can do in a few words, how would you describe the way that your team defines value? Put that Mentimeter link in here one more time. And customer satisfaction. So this person is saying that the team defines value based on how happy the customer is. I like that. How big a smile is on the customer face can be a way of how are we delivering value. Very abstractly, okay. How satisfied are the stakeholders? Stories that delight the customer. I like that. Meeting customers' needs. They don't define value. What the director thinks is the most important. That might be problematic. I can see some ways that might be problematic. What benefits the customer? Functionality, working as expected or customers' needs. Zero end user complaints. Finished story counts. Resolving issues for the customer. Stakeholder satisfaction. NPS, I'm not familiar with. If anybody can enlighten me to what NPS is, throw it in the Net Promoter Score. Okay. Does it benefit the goal of the project? Does it display or convey what's expected? Maintaining velocity. So basically, did we accomplish the same number of story points this week as we did last week? We don't have any success metrics. Okay. Customer. Okay. So these are all. Most of these are all things that could be a very good way of describing what we consider value. You will get different results with different definitions of value. And you also may find that half the team considers one thing to be what's valuable and half the team considers another thing to be what's valuable. I was working with a team where their definition of what was valuable was very much driven by following a particular architecture that had been planned out up front. There wasn't anything necessarily wrong with having that as being a piece of the value, but following that architecture was becoming more, for some people on the team, was way more important than actually delivering any software. And so they were getting into situations where if delivering the software conflicted with following a particular architecture, even if they had evidence that architecture really was not a good fit as they got into things, wasn't a good fit for delivering what the customer wanted, some people would still try to deliver the architecture, even in face of abundant evidence that was not a good decision based on the information that they knew that they had at that point for what the customer needed. So that type of different definitions of value was creating a lot of conflict on the team, and eventually ended up shutting that project down. Okay, so one thing I really try to encourage, and like I said, it's not a matter that this definition is better than all the other definitions of value, but I think it's something we ought to consider, that the return on investment we're getting. And the reason I like using that, or at least getting people to think about this, is because this encompasses not only what have we delivered, but also how much does it cost. And if we miss those two aspects of things, it's very easy to strive for something that is perfect, but in ways that costs way more than what it's actually worth to produce. I used to work years ago. I used to work for a large church in Michigan, and I was growing the IT department there. And so I think we had like 11 people in my department. So you get the idea. It's a pretty big organization, and they started up a remote church somewhere else in a different part of town for people that were closer to that area. And it was interesting to see them kind of struggle with how much to invest in different things, because the things that made perfect sense at the at the location where there were 7,000 people coming each weekend didn't necessarily make sense, didn't have the same return on investment somewhere where you had maybe 100 people coming. And so there was situations where people were used to being at the large location and you had a maintenance department that would take care of everything. If a light bulb was out, somebody would replace a light bulb. In the smaller location, they were bringing that same mentality there, and it was a struggle to get used to figuring out how to go from the large place to go to a small place, and the return on investment of things that made perfect sense to do at the large organization or at the large building, but were very, very expensive for what you were getting for them at the smaller location. So that's where return on investment becomes very, very valuable in making sure that the team is really thinking through not just what are we getting at the other end of it, but how much did it cost to do this? And something that costs 100 times as much, if we've got a decision where we can deliver this story, but it'll take 100 hours, or we can deliver this other story, a trimmed down version of the story that will take 1 hour because it's already basically exists. We just need to tweak a few things to make it work. If that story that takes 100 hours is only 10%, produces only 10% more return on investment than the one we can do in 1 hour, that may not be a good use of our time. We may be better off delivering that and then switching to something else. Okay, frozen on the screen. Is that working for everybody else? Can everybody else see okay? I'm looking at the stream. Okay. Okay, cool. Okay, so return on investment, very important thing to be talking in terms of value. Get your teams thinking. You may have different ways of defining value, but make sure your team is really thinking about what's the return on investment, because that's one of the most valuable things, because it encompasses both not just what is being produced as far as the return it generates, but also what was the investment that took to get to that. So this is a picture I like to think of when I think of return on investment. So this is a warehouse or something. I just picked a picture of a warehouse. I don't even know what these things are, but right down at the bottom there is a box, right? There's a box down at the bottom of that thing, and it's doing something we don't necessarily know what's in the box. But what type of return on investment is that box generating right there? Well, it's not actually generating anything, right? It's just sitting there. It's just being stored with the idea that it will be used sometime. And in this may make perfect sense, right? In this warehouse to have this, because maybe not having that right away when you need it would be very, very expensive. So it may have some value, but it's not actually generating a return on investment. And I think this is a very important thing to be thinking of when we're looking at our software, is how much work have we put into something that's not actually generating any return yet? Because we want to minimize the amount of inventory we just have sitting around, things we built for the customer that they can't actually use yet. When Kanban, or the things that grew into Kanban, were being developed at Toyota, they went and looked at a model, grocery stores. They were using grocery stores as a model because they thought that was very, very useful. It was very, very useful to get people thinking in terms of stuff that will rot if you don't get it out on the shelf fast enough. Now, Toyota's parts generally, hopefully, don't rot. If I got the bumper for a car and it sits there for 6 months, it's not going to rot away unless I guess it could rust or something like that. But it's not just going to not be usable after 6 months if I'm taking care of it. But if I take an apple and sit it somewhere for 6 months, the value of that apple goes down significantly probably every single day, until it's not useful for anything. You should feed it to the pigs, I guess, something like that. So they were using that as the model for how they wanted to think about their inventory. And if we think of our software in a similar way, how much software do we have that's not actually being used yet? So just a question, just for fun. If your working code was fruit, how would it smell? So this is working code that we haven't actually gotten to the customer. Do you have is it really, really fresh? There's just a little bit of code and it's going to the customer this afternoon. Or do you have, it's a little bit fruity, it's got a little bit of a fruity smell to it. It hasn't gone to the customer really quickly, but it's still, still edible. Or would it be ripe, where it's getting to be the point you might not want to eat it? Rank, which I would say is like you definitely don't want to eat it. Or is the idea of working code just completely imaginary? We don't really have all that much working code anyway. So if you start talking to your teams in terms of how long has this code been sitting around before it goes to the customer, I think this is a healthy way to start thinking about, are we actually getting the return on investment for what we've invested in for the customer? And this is where DevOps, I think, has pushed the industry forward in a lot of areas, or DevOps has made some big strides in getting the industry to think more of how do we get things deployed through quickly so it doesn't rot along the way. Okay, so I'll wait just a few more seconds. You want to see where, okay, so most of us kind of in the ripe stage. We've got few on the little bit fruity. I know that no one here is saying that it's really, really fresh. This is just, we're deploying the code that we wrote yesterday, we're deploying this afternoon. And there may be good reasons for that, right? You might be in an issue of, you might be working in an environment where it does take longer to get things through to production. I see Craig's asking, is this more of a PO issue than a Scrum Master? Are you asking on like how the code smells if it's fruit, like how long it takes to get stuff to production? Just an org issue. So, okay, how long it takes? So I would agree that it's an organizational issue, but I think most of the time individual teams don't realize how much they can influence this. And we tend to, it's very easy to just assume this has to do with the organization. There's nothing I can do to actually change this. Some of the things that the team can do to make it to where the code doesn't sit around as long, so it doesn't sit around and rot, are working like test-driven approaches to things, test-driven development, behavior-driven development. Some of those things that let us prove that the code is ready to go to production sooner have a lot of, or can make a big difference in the return on investment of delivering a small piece of code. So let's say I make a change to the code. It's a 2-line change. It takes 15 minutes. Let's just assume a developer makes the change. It takes 15 minutes. That developer is making $100 an hour, so that change cost us $25. How much do we have to pay to get that to production? Is it going to take 8 person hours to get that all the way through to production? So then it's $800 to deploy a $25 change. If that's the case, we probably won't deploy just that one change. But if we made the investment in behavior-driven development, test-driven development, and we make that 15-minute change, and then we can prove that the rest of the system, that everything works exactly as expected, and the deployment process is automated enough that it doesn't take a large investment to get to production, we may be very happy with deploying a 15-minute change all the way through to production. And that's probably not just the product owner's issue that's behind that. It's probably not just the Scrum Master. Although I wouldn't say it's just the dev team either. It's a different way of doing work that's based on kind of this mentality of it's really valuable to get stuff through the system. So we're going to make that investment every time we deliver something. We're very happy to work on making that pipeline efficient and ready to deliver whatever it is that needs to go through to production. We'll look at some other stuff related to that in a little bit, but not just an org issue. Yes, flow. Good point, Tom. It's the flow of getting things through, and that becomes what you're focused on rather than just how many bits can I write. There was a help desk I read about years ago, and so we're talking about how we define value, and what's important to the team. This help desk was a very proactive help desk, and they tried to fix problems before problems occurred. So there weren't a lot of tickets that they were closing because they could see, hey, this person's computer, we're starting to see some errors in the log files. We're going to go in and actually swap it out ahead of time so they don't have any problems. We'll image their computer over, swap it out. That person never had to open a ticket because the problem was fixed before they even knew there was a problem. And that's how they approached everything that they could, was being very, very proactive. Well, new management came in and said, hey, we want to really improve the quality of work that the help desk is doing and make sure we're getting a good return on investment for the people there. So we're going to start a new system. And each person that works for the help desk is going to get their bonus based on how many tickets they closed. Well, previously, the people working there closed very few tickets because most of the work they were doing was very, very proactive. So the bonuses that they were used to getting for doing a good job of keeping the organization going, they realized were going to evaporate. So they thought about it for a while and said, well, we don't really want to sabotage the way we're working because it's a whole lot worse for us just to respond to emergencies all the time. And it's bad for the organization. But we're being told we need to close lots of tickets. What can we do in order to be able to close lots of tickets, but still overall keep working this way that's efficient? So they came up with a great plan. Every Monday morning at 9 o'clock, they would unplug the internet for 10 minutes. Unplug the internet for 10 minutes. Everyone would open a ticket saying that the internet was down. Then they would plug the internet back in and go through and close out hundreds of tickets from everyone in the organization saying that the internet was down. And the rest of the time, outside of those 10 minutes, they continued to do the good job that they had always done before. But the point here is that if we're not sure what's actually valuable, and we can sabotage teams by giving them things and making them look valuable when it's not actually what we want done. And that happens a lot, more than we would probably like to admit it happens, but that is not, and this example kind of stands out, but this is not an uncommon occurrence at organizations when you actually incentivize behavior that you don't want. So how had value been defined for the help desk? Well, it had been previously defined as we keep everything up and running. Well, we changed the value to how many tickets can we close. Now, the tickets turned out not to be a very good proxy for doing your job well. So we can also lead by defining progress. So we've talked about defining what's valuable. Now let's talk about defining progress. Because if we think of value as being what happens when we finish something, we realize some value, we get a return on investment. We also want to have a definition of what's a good way to define that we've actually taken a step toward what we're trying to do, trying to deliver, even if it's not to the point that's delivering a return on investment yet. So the question is for you, how does your team define progress? And there may be other, if you think of something else that's not on here, throw it in the chat, but is it story points, percent complete, code deployed to production, lines of code written? Great chapter about working to the metric in the book Super Thinking. I'll have to check that out. Thanks for mentioning that. Oh, Dilbert's team writes a mini. I remember seeing that. That was pretty funny. Okay, how does your team define progress? It looks like no one's using lines of code written, so that's cool because that can be that often in. I can write lots of lines of code to do the same thing that you can do with 2 lines of code, and I can get lots of progress if that's how I'm measuring things. A lot of us are using story points. Looks like most of us are using percent complete, which oftentimes means something where we're like rolling it up and we've got 100 stories to work on. We've done 50 of them, so we say that 50% complete. It looks like 3 of us are using code deployed to production, which probably, if we look at the Agile principles, is probably the one that's most associated with agility. Is that we define progress as being working code, and if code isn't working on anything, maybe that's not the best way to define it as working code. So we've got a range of things here, and right, like I'm saying, this doesn't mean, oh no, we're using the wrong thing. It's not a panic, but I would encourage you, if you're not using code deployed to production, is there a way that maybe you could do that? Is there a way that you could at least get that on people's radar so they're starting to think about it? Okay, definition of progress should be tied to working software. And when I say working software, I don't just mean software that is sitting on a shelf somewhere and someone says it works. I mean software that's actually working on real data. Even if we put it into a simulation environment and it's running on real data, but it's not the system of record, that's still a much better definition than just, hey, it worked for a developer one time when we closed the story. That's not a good way to define progress. Software that's doing actual work. Is software doing work if it only runs in your test environment? That's better than if you haven't gotten it to your test environment, right? But that's probably not the best way to define progress. And one thing, Tesla does something interesting. They release new software to cars that if you own the car, you don't even really know about. And they have things that will run in the background as shadow mode. So they have all this unreleased code that they don't know what would happen if you put it, they've written this code, they think it will work really, really well. But before they actually make it, and I'm talking about the self-driving aspect of things, before they actually roll it out to where it can help drive your car, they run it in shadow mode on a bunch of vehicles to where it doesn't actually control the brake, it doesn't control the steering or anything like that, but it gets into a situation, let's say the car stops, and then this unreleased code says, oh, this looks like it's a stoplight. It just turned green. I don't see anything on the sides. I would go here. This is where I would go. And it makes that decision based on real inputs. It does not, however, apply the accelerator. And what they do is they start keeping track of that and saying, our system, this unreleased code running in shadow mode, would actually have made the car go. What did the driver do? And if they see lots of discrepancies between what the driver would do and what the code that's running on real data would do, they can look into it and say, okay, everybody would go in this situation. And all the drivers do not go in this situation, but the unreleased code does. This is something we need to look into. And that type of having code that's actually working on real stuff like that is a very, very big deal. So I would consider that code that's doing work, or it's at least a lot closer to doing real work than anything that's just running on a test track somewhere. So doing work versus being the system of record. And a lot of times people say, oh, we can't deploy this to production until we're deploying this really, really large batch of things. I've worked with a lot of teams and like on batch processing things. So there's all these files coming in. And we started out, we were replacing an existing system, but we couldn't just shut that system off, right? The system wasn't written to the point that we could just shut it off. And it was going to take a while to get to that point. So we set up another system, and instead of just making the files go to the running system, we now split them. So they'd go to the running system, and they'd also, a copy would go to our environment that's just working. We wanted to work on real files. And we get our code in, getting real data and real files coming through. And it's amazing the number of things you find when you've got real files coming through that didn't show up in testing. And that made for a lot better, it made it to where we were much more confident of the progress we had made because we knew what would happen with real files coming into the system. Whereas if we were just doing our test environment, we wouldn't have known that. And this is, I think it's going to be very interesting. This was something from 2017 where they were comparing the way that things were built in electronics. And it said that Tesla was actually 6 years ahead of Toyota and VW. Now this was, let's see, this one was in 2020. So that means we're coming up in 2 years. We'll see if everybody's caught up and Tesla was stagnant. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. But the point, one of the things I think is very interesting is Tesla can get a whole lot of driving time that other companies were trying to do by sending people out in vehicles to drive around on streets. So will that help Tesla stay ahead? Because there's been some, it'll be interesting to see how much that helps them. There's lots of other things you can do to mess up the lead that they had back when this was written. And it's going to be an interesting area to look at. Okay, another area of leadership in reporting progress. So we talked about how we measure progress, but how to report progress. Because if we report things in ways that drive poor behavior, we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot, even if we are measuring behavior well. So this is an example I've used a few times. You may have seen it, but if we look at these books, we've got all these books here: Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, Pinocchio, Divine Comedy, Moby Dick, and Robinson Crusoe. And we say, okay, we've done these three, and we say, we're going to measure progress on this. And, oh, obviously, we have finished 50% of our reading list. Now, I guess I don't have the books right here, but these books are not all created equal. Some of these books are quite a bit thicker than others. Oh, they're over there. Alice in Wonderland is a fairly short book. So is Peter Pan, and so is Pinocchio. But the last three books on this list, I think, oh, actually, I do have the books here. Okay, so here I've got Peter Pan. This is Peter Pan, and then I've got Pinocchio right here. But if you notice, Moby Dick, this is Moby Dick right here, this black book. Moby Dick is quite a bit different. And Robinson Crusoe is quite a bit different. And Divine Comedy is quite a bit different. And I don't have Alice in Wonderland here, but Alice in Wonderland is similar size. If I just count the number of books, I may be way off in my idea of how much reading I've actually done. if I end up with the Divine Comedy in Italian and I have to learn Italian first, I may be completely off in terms of decades of how long it will take me to actually read some of these things. If I measure it a different way and look at the chapters, well, now I might get an estimate that says, okay, we've done 65 of 331 chapters, or in the case of Divine Comedy, cantos. So now maybe I'm going to say we're actually, oh, that covers up, isn't it? What is my number down there? Is that 19% complete? What would that be? 65? Yeah, I think somewhere around the 20% mark complete. So that's a very, very different number. 19, okay. So very, very different number than what we were getting when we were just counting the number of books. So, and what I want to illustrate with this is that the way we measure progress, we can do things that make it feel like we've done a whole bunch when we haven't actually made much progress at all. So leaders must understand what's actually being represented by stated progress. And this is where percent complete can be very misleading, particularly if you say, hey, we've done all our requirements. We are 33% done with the project, because we'll do another 33% of coding it, and then another 33% of testing it, and then we'll be done. That tells you very little about where you actually are, but oftentimes that's how progress actually gets measured. So leaders must guide teams to report progress in ways that minimizes the hidden work. If I have to learn Italian to read that book, I don't want that to be the last book I leave and just say, oh yeah, it's only going to be, 1/6 of my reading. You've probably seen situations where the last 10% takes 90% of the total time. I was at a conference, they were talking to some people and say, okay, we've done the first 90% of this application, and now we're getting ready to start on the next 90% of the application. Which was funny when they said that, but everyone could sympathize with it because everyone had experienced that. And you probably experienced something like that as well. So if this is happening, this is actually, I would call this a failure of leadership. If we're getting to the point where we get to the last 10% of something and it takes 90% of the total time, we've been measuring things incorrectly. And the way we measure things, the team is involved. But from a leadership standpoint, now I'm thinking, I'm speaking more specifically to people that are in management or formal leadership positions. But if this happens and the numbers that you're getting puts you in a position like this, that is a failure of leadership, because it probably means you don't understand enough about what is being done to really recognize that you're not getting, that these numbers don't mean what they look like they're meaning. And in most cases, it's probably because the way that the team is being incentivized, and what the team is being asked for and what management is telling the team is important is actually producing this type of thing. And so and I'm not trying to take away responsibility that the team as a whole needs to be watching out for this, but I've worked with teams that were saying, we're reporting stuff because that's what management is asking for. It does not mean what they're saying that it means. They're taking this and rolling this information up to the larger organization, and they say, hey, we're this % done. And the people doing the work were like, no, we gave you the numbers you asked for, but that does not mean we're this % done, because we've got all this hidden work that we know about, but wasn't coming up. And to the point, this one team I was talking to was like, if we say something, we'll get in trouble. Well, that definitely is a failure of leadership. So here's kind of a graph, and I guess you can't see so this is how much work is done and then time. I think my axes aren't showing up very well there. So we're writing code and we're making progress, right? So we write code and make progress. Then we try to deploy and suddenly it starts leveling off. Then we get to a point where every new feature breaks something else. And so if we look at just that very first part of things, it looks like we're making really, really good progress. But there's all this hidden work that's going to slow things down. And it's going to take a lot longer to finish than it looked like at the very, very beginning. And the problem there is that we were just measuring the written code instead of actually measuring getting this through the process to where it's actually producing value. And this is very, very common, where you said the project feels like it's going really, really fast and then it gets slower and slower and slower. So from a leadership perspective, we want to encourage our teams to make sure that all the things that we think we may hit that will slow it down, build that into the process from the very beginning, so we can get a graph that looks something that doesn't jump up and then we discover all the stuff that's hidden. I'll show an example in a minute, but we want to measure all the way through and build the ability to change into the process. So thinking of the reading list thing, so a conversation, I started on the last book for my literature class. Say, that's great. Were the papers hard to write? Like, papers? Yes, the papers you have to write for each book. Well, I haven't started that yet. I'm just excited that I'm almost finished. Okay, this is you probably encountered a student that has done something like this. If you have children, it's like, yeah, I'm making great progress, because they leave the hard stuff till the very end. But this is the exact same thing we do a lot of time with our software when we're creating it, where we leave the thing that will actually prove whether we built the right thing until the very end, which could be testing or getting it to work on real data. In this case, they may have turned every page of the book, but depending on what they have to write in their papers, they may discover they need to reread a lot to actually make the papers what they need to be. So here's another example of a similar conversation. We just hit 90% completion on the XYZ code base. That's awesome. So are you happy with the production environment? We'll request that when the code is complete. It's like, your 10% may be bigger than you think. I don't see why it would be, because we've got 90% of the code written. Those are different. Those are not necessarily measuring the same things. 90% of the features done. It's covering it up on my screen, so I can't always see it. So if you've used Windows long enough, you've probably encountered this, right? Situation, I'm copying something down, and it says there's going to be 39 years left to copy things down. And they've gotten a lot better about the way that they estimate things. Now, having grown up using like a 9600 baud modem, there are situations where you could actually have this and it be accurate. But I like this thing from XKCD, where it says the author of the Windows file copy dialog visits some friends. So he calls them up and says, I'm just outside of town, so it should be there in 15 minutes. Actually, no, more like 6 days. Like, oh no, wait, 30 seconds. So have you ever experienced that copy? But this is what we want to avoid when it comes to the way that we're reporting out progress. If we're doing stuff like this, where it's like, oh yeah, we'll be done in 6 months. No, it's like 6 years. Oh no, now we're going to be, we want to make sure that we're measuring stuff in a way that the numbers, way we're reporting stuff actually has meaning. We want something like this, right? To where when we're working through stuff, it's got a gradual, we've made this much progress, and that tells us our rate of about what our rate of progress is going to be. We want to do things to where it's actually a line, and the stuff that we did yesterday actually predicts what we're going to do tomorrow. If we're not careful, though, we can end up with that other graph like this. So we write code and we say we've got lots of progress, and then we try to deploy, and then every new feature breaks. This isn't a failure of estimation. This isn't a problem where we look at it, it's like, oh, if we just had to spend more time estimating. That's not the issue here. It's not a matter of we just needed to spend more time trying to guess how long things would take. This is a failure of the definition of progress, because we allowed ourselves to say that we had made progress because we had written some code when we didn't have any evidence that that code could actually be deployed, and we didn't have any way of testing it to prove that code continued to do what we expected it to do as we built the rest of the system. What we really want is something like this, where when we start, we're like, okay, there's a wide, those didn't show up very well at all, but there's a very wide range of when we'll probably get done. And then as we make some progress, the range narrows. And as we make some more progress, the range continues to narrow until we finish. But we don't want to get in a situation where the range continues to widen as we go, and we have less and less of an idea of when things will be done, which unfortunately happens a lot of the time. You want to lead teams to do this, to be able to say, okay, let's make sure we're reporting stuff in a way that has a wide idea of how much, to represent how much we don't know as we go. So, question for you. How would you respond to this text? So you get a text from Mortimer, say, great job, I'm finishing all the work. You text Mortimer, say, great job, I'm finishing all the work. The demo was great. Can we deploy that code to production environment? And his reply is, but that would mean getting security to agree it doesn't have any security issues. They might ask for all kinds of changes. So we finished, quote unquote, finished all the work. Everybody loved the demo. And then we asked to deploy it to production environment. And Mortimer points out that if we do that, we have to get security to look at it, and they may ask for changes. So how would you respond kindly to a text like that? Why wasn't security? Yes, so that's a very good point. Why wasn't security involved from the beginning? Well, he's telling you here. He's like, because they might ask for changes. If we get security involved from the beginning, it's going to take a lot longer to write the code. What concerns have they voiced to date? Well, in this case, we haven't showed it to them because they might have asked for changes. Any other thoughts of how you might respond? Can we deploy something that's already safe? That's good idea. Is there something they have approved? Yeah, actually, that's an excellent idea. That's part of the process. We need their sign-off to be compliant. Yes, that's very good. If we haven't actually done this yet, we may not be able to actually say that we are done. So those are all great responses to say to this type of thing. Here's mine. It's saying they might ask for all kinds of exchanges, and I would probably respond, exactly. Until we've identified and made those changes, it's hard to know how much work is left. And so we need to be very careful that we don't consider this work done. There's lots of hidden work still inside of it. Okay, so that covers the things I wanted to look at with everybody. So let's review. The reason I put these quizzes in here at the end isn't because I'm like, stuck in college and wanting to make sure we test everybody. But I find when I have something that just kind of makes me rethink about what I've just looked at, I remember it a lot better. So that's why this here. So I encourage you to participate. We will give away a copy of my book, the Starting Agile. And I guess you can't see me, so there's no sense me holding it up doesn't help you. So give away a copy of Starting Agile to the winner of this. So go ahead and join. I will, let me put the link here one more time just in case you hadn't been on it so far. And I encourage you to participate because this is a way that we can take away more from this than if we don't. Okay, give it just a few more seconds. Go and click on that link. So you've got some penguins and bees and all kinds of great participants here. So let's give it about 4 more seconds. 2, 1. And you can also join in the middle of it, but I want to give you the best chance at winning the book. Okay, so answering fast gets you more points. First question, what does Tesla do with their unreleased self-driving code? According to this talk, what does Tesla do with their unreleased self-driving code? Do they sell it to other manufacturers, run it on customers' vehicles and compare it to real drivers, launch it into space, or rewrite it in COBOL? What does Tesla do with their unreleased self-driving code? Yes, they run it on customers' vehicles and compare it to real drivers. They're actually getting it running in a production, or in an environment where it's working on real data. So very good. Let's see who is the fastest. Because it looks like everyone got it right. And it looks like Coco has the magic fingers, followed by Robert, Astrid, KG, Lopo, Stingalicious, Rhett, Joe H, Cake, and Jennifer C. Next question. Fast gets you more points. And in the help desk example, what happened when leadership changed their value to closing tickets? They changed their value to closing tickets. And what happened when they did that? Were more tickets closed and they had happier users? More tickets created and closed, unhappy users? Or the organization became better? 1 second remaining. And yes, more tickets were created and closed, but they had unhappy users. So more tickets were closed, but the users weren't happier because now they had to deal with an internet outage that they didn't have to deal with before. It wasn't actually something that was beneficial for the organization. Before, everything was so proactive that there were very few tickets being closed. And the organization did not become any better. The organization actually became worse at what they were doing because they had to find a way to create more tickets, and they didn't want to do that by not being proactive. Okay, let's check out the leaderboard here. And it looks like Robert pulls in the lead, followed by Lopo, KG, Astrid, Joe H, Rhett, SA, St. Elmo, Jennifer C, and Jude. And I realize there's a little bit of a trick here trying to make sure that you answer fast when you've got answers that are very, very similar. So there's a little bit of chance involved in here. Next question is, a code base that has never been deployed is preserved like plastic fruit, can be deployed instantly. or probably has significant hidden work. Is preserved like plastic fruit, can be deployed instantly, or probably has significant hidden work. 2 seconds remaining. And yes, if you have a code base that has never been deployed, the reason I would say it's probably not going to be preserved like plastic fruit, that you can have your grandma's plastic fruit and it still isn't going to rot away. If you code base that has never been deployed, there are probably lots of things changing, and you can very easily get into a situation that it won't even run. It depended on libraries that now have been deprecated and you can't get anymore because a security flaw was discovered in them. It probably cannot be deployed instantly because if it's never been deployed, there's a big chance that there's something else you need to do to be able to deploy it. So there probably has a significant amount of hidden work, things that you didn't know about that need to be there to deploy it, or just the fact that you need to set up the environment to deploy. If there hasn't been an environment, there's not a pipeline. So undeployed code base has a significant amount of hidden work. I've never seen take a bunch of code base and you get ready to deploy it for the first time and have fewer things go wrong than I expected. It is always more things happen than what I expect. See if Robert can maintain his lead. And it looks like Lopo pulls into the top spot, followed by KG, Robert, Joe H, SA, St. Elmo, Jude, Mars, Stingalicious, and Simba. Next question. Got 2 questions left. Answer fast for more points. What type of failure makes the last 10% taking 90% of the project time? What type of failure makes the last 10% take 90% of the project time? Is it a failureship of leadership, a failureship of estimation, failure of culture, or failure of imagination? And yes, the one I was thinking of here, I may have said this 2 different ways. I think the other thing I may have said wasn't on here, but a failure of leadership. If you've got a point that if you are leading a project and you're in a position where people are reporting things in ways that don't actually represent the progress being made, that is a failure of leadership in how you are asking for stuff. Kind of like the example of the leaders coming in and saying, okay, now you're going to get measured by your performance of how many tickets you close. That was a failure of leadership of not understanding what was actually valuable to the organization and not understanding what was actually happening. It usually is not an issue of just we needed to spend more time estimating. You could make a case for it being failure of culture. That's not what I mentioned, but those would probably be reasonable things to do as well. But the reason it's probably not a failure of estimation is no matter how good we guess, we're going to be wrong. And what we don't want to do is get in a situation that we finish things by a particular date. We don't want to be in a place where we finish things by a particular date, but the only reason we finish it by that date is because we pushed it so far out in the future that it was nearly impossible to miss. Because if we're estimating and we're just making sure we have the date that's so far out that we can't miss it, that's not really useful information because our project work is going to expand to fit that. We're wanting things where we're actually getting a forecast based on what we're doing today. Here's what we can expect tomorrow. And if we're not getting reports in that way, that's a failure of leadership in the way that we're asking for numbers and the way that we're rewarding progress, and probably in the way of just how we're showing what's important to the team. Okay, and final question here, I think. Oh, yeah, leaderboard. Forgot about the leaderboard, the most important part here, right? And okay, Robert moves into second place. We've got Lopo still in the lead. After Robert is KG, Joe H, SA, St. Elmo, Jude, Stingalicious, LB, and Mars. So this is pretty close between Robert and Lopo. We'll see if Robert can take Lopo out or somebody else will move into the lead here. Last question. Fast for more points. Hopefully it's a really hard one. We'll see. Oh, what exercise did Mark suggest in this talk? Force ranking the ease or difficulty of each Agile principles, switching to Kanban, implementing SAFe to fix deployment issues, or management should perform a haka to show their commitment. And if you've never seen a haka, you need to look it up. Those are very exciting. So yes, force ranking the ease or difficulty of each Agile principle. don't think I mentioned the other ones, and I definitely didn't mention management should perform a haka to show their commitment, although that could be a lot of fun. Let's see what happened here. Robert says he didn't knock Lobo out of the top spot. Oh, but Joe H pulls into the lead and takes it for the win. Good job, Joe. I think I threw people off with that last one. Good job, Joe. If you want to take a screenshot, send me a email and give me your address. I will get that book headed your way. If screenshot doesn't work, I'll probably be able to recognize that's a Joe H. So thank you everybody for coming. I hope this was useful. I'm going to stick around for a little bit. Looks like we actually finished ahead of time today, which is great. And I'd love to talk if you've got any questions or want to